What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and today I've got a really exciting video for you all. You guys have been asking for an NZXT build for ages, and I've just received their brand new N7 B550 motherboard, so what better opportunity? In this video, we're going to put this awesome build together. I'm going to talk you through each of the components I chose and why, and give you some alternative choices. We're going to find out if NZXT's new B550 board is actually worth your cash, and then see how the whole system performs in the most popular titles, testing out Cyberpunk 2077, a little bit of Fortnite, Apex Legends, and many, many more. So without any further ado, let's dive into it. The first component into the ring for today's build is actually the motherboard. This is NZXT's N7 B550 board. NZXT started making motherboards with their lineup of Z490 options, and actually I think this B550 choice will come as a surprise to many people. I don't think we expected NZXT to go for the more budget AMD chipset, but I'm glad they did, as B550 is a way better value option than X570, especially in today's climate. While this might not be a Z490 board, they do share a lot of design similarities, as you'd expect. So you've got the kind of stereotypical NZXT design. We have got a built-in I/O shield, which is a big win. You've got Wi-Fi built in as well here, which is awesome. That's going to save you about $15 with an adapter that you don't need to buy. You've got this plastic kind of shielding or covering on the entire motherboard with some ventilation around the chipset area, but no fan, thankfully, so that's going to be nice and quiet. I really like actually how simple and sleek the I/O is down the side of the board. So you've got not one, but two USB 3 headers, which is pretty awesome, 6 SATA connections as well. And then I'm guessing all of our M.2 ports are actually hidden underneath this plastic shielding. Okay, there we go. So there's our first M.2 port. I was indeed correct. And I'm guessing there's another one at the bottom. So perhaps just the two M.2 slots for this board, which is to be expected with B550, because there's not quite the bandwidth that you'll find on the higher end chipsets for more expansion slots. You can see we've also got some metal shielding around the actual main PCIe slot, which helps prevent the motherboard against GPU sag related issues. And by the looks of things, some pretty good VRM cooling as well at the top here, which combines with an 8 and a 4-pin power connector. So potentially some good room for overclocking on this board as well, which is always nice to see. It's available in black or white. We've gone for the black one, which should work in our H510 chassis choice today. We're going to leave the M.2 covers off just for a minute, so we can go ahead and install the M.2 SSD and the other components. Before we do that though, let's take a look at the CPU choice. Now, B550 I think is best matched up with a Ryzen 5 5600X. One of AMD's latest CPU releases. This chip is blooming awesome. With super fast clock speeds, 6 cores and 12 threads, it's probably the best gaming CPU on the market right now. You do actually get an included stock cooler, but of course, we're not going to be using that in today's build because we've got a nice juicy option in from NZXT. Do be careful when you take the CPU out the protective plastic case, as the pins on the bottom are really fragile, and unlike Intel CPUs, the chip is a lot more delicate. So just something to be, mindful and wary of. We're going to pop our CPU into place nice and easily. You guys know how to do this step right, and our CPU is in. As I say, we'll come back to our M.2 storage in a second, but first, let's get some RAM installed. This is a brand new kit from Patriot, and this is their latest Viper Steel addition to the memory market. This kit is actually a 3200 MHz kit, but I'm going to recommend you clock it up slightly, just to 3600 MHz, as that will give us a few more FPS here and there in gaming titles. Having a dual channel kit as well for Ryzen is hugely beneficial, as it will give you a very slight FPS advantage. AMD CPUs are much more picky when it comes to memory than Intel CPUs are, which is not a bad thing. It's just something you definitely want to be aware of. In terms of the M.2 drive, that kind of rounds up our motherboard assembly, as we're going to call it, and this is XPG's Spectrix S20G. This drive is the perfect addition to our build today. It works perfectly with our powerful CPU, RAM, and motherboard combo. It's going to fit into our motherboard very nicely, and although it will stop us from actually putting the M.2 heatsink cover back on, I'm not too worried, as the RGB is a really nice upside. And we can of course still put the bottom M.2 cover on without any issues. Cool, it's now about time we go ahead and move the motherboard into the case, and there could only be one choice. This is, of course, NZXT's H510 Elite. I am very excited to get my hands on this chassis. It is at the premium end of the market. It is a little bit more expensive than other options out there, but design-wise, I'm not surprised because it looks bloody fantastic. Always cut away from you. Top tip there, ladies and gents. It's clean, it's compact, and damn does it look good. I do wish that the I/O on the top of the case was a bit less minimalistic. We could have had another USB-A port on there, I think. That wouldn't have been too difficult. I have genuinely always loved this kind of NZXT included cable cover. I think it's going to look super sleek and will really help with our build's overall kind of two-tone aesthetic, especially, bit of a squeeze actually, especially once we go ahead and get the motherboard installed. It's a bit of a quirk of this motherboard, I guess, but you do actually have to remove the kind of M.2 cover to actually access one of your motherboard screws, which is just a trade-off really, but something to definitely keep in mind when you go ahead and screw your motherboard in. Otherwise though, kind of screwing through the shroud does keep your screws nice and hidden and looks a lot cleaner. I'm going to give NZXT some kudos for that. We've got some great hardware in this build, but we haven't yet talked about cooling. And that's where NZXT's Kraken X63 comes in. Now, I do need to come clean with you guys. I do need to be a little bit honest. Is this cooler a little bit overkill for a 3070 build like this? Yes, it is. But will it give you really nice aesthetics? Will it keep the build super quiet? It will indeed. And this is one of the most popular coolers out there for good reason. I'm not just saying this, but that's genuinely an innovation. Being able to just remove this front plate out, no problem, with some captive thumb screws, 2 thumb screws in fact, to screw the radiator in. It makes the whole build that much easier. Hallelujah. One thing to note is because of clearance with the cable cover, which I want to keep on for aesthetics, we've got a spare RGB fan or two. So I think I'm just going to pop this one in the top of the case just to give us a little bit more RGB, which I think is going to look quite nice actually. Very comprehensive CPU cooler installation instructions. Oh, no. That's the case instructions. That's not what I'm after. You don't get a manual. You have to scan a QR code. Not sure how I feel about that. I've checked out NZXT's fancy 2021 manual, and what we need to do is just remove the pre-installed plastic mounting hardware and then screw these kind of pre-made screw assemblies, which is quite a nice touch actually, into the included AMD backplate. This will provide 4 posts, which our CPU cooler is then going to plop directly on top of. There we go, with the slightly tweaked mounting hardware on, our CPU cooler should, with its pre-applied thermal paste, you haven't got to worry about that, should just slot onto the CPU. Oh yeah, that's so simple. And then we just need to secure it down and take off the protective film. And we should be good to go. Awesome stuff, looking great. Let's clear off our workspace. And I think it's probably time for us to install the graphics card before finishing off and rounding out with the power supply. BRB.
Few moments later.
You guys obviously don't need me to tell you how difficult it is to pick a GPU for a gaming PC in 2021. Now, stock and pricing is obviously quite difficult at the moment, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the 3070, our GPU choice for this build, is an extraordinary card. If you can get your hands on one for not necessarily RRP, but a semi-reasonable price that you're comfortable with. I opted to stick with the Founders card, although we've covered lots of different 3070s on the channel. And that's just because I think it will look a bit more clean in our build today. This is a metal build all around, right? This is quite a compact card as well, so any push-pull radiators or anything like that will work no problem at all. And with a compact case like this, you can't go too long on the GPU because otherwise it's just not going to fit. Either way, though, this is a great card for gaming at 1440p and 4K, but we'll dive into some detailed performance numbers in just a minute. So hang tight, and yeah, that's it. I don't know where I was going with that. Here we go. Oh, boom, the GPU is installed. The one downside we are going to have is that we do need to use Nvidia's really weird kind of cable adapter. Hopefully power supplies will start including these more compact cables, but I've got a bad feeling it's going to take a few years until this more streamlined connector really hits the mainstream. So we're going to have to be a bit creative with our cable management, at least for today's system. That paves the way nicely for the power supply. It's a bit of a full house for NZXT here. Opening up the box, you can see here we got our included cables, which come in quite a cool NZXT bag, and this looks actually very reusable. And then the power supply itself, pretty standard stuff in a nice little felt package with that fully modular interface on the top here. Nice simple fan layout at the front and a button which allows you to turn fan 0 mode on or off. This will basically stop the fan from spinning when the PSU is under low or idle loads to keep the system whisper quiet. And with that, after a little bit of faffing about, I will be honest with you, the build's looking pretty good and it's ready for us to turn on for the first time live on the video. So let's plug the PC in, hit the power button. Oh yes, that looks pretty good actually. I'm liking that a lot. We've got the front fans lit up. We've got our Infinity kind of NZXT logo nicely lit up as well. And I think there's only one thing left to do before we jump into our gaming benchmark tests. And that's to see exactly how good all of this system looks when it's all powered up in an awesome glam montage. Roll the clip. Awesome stuff. So we've seen just how good this system looks when it's all powered up. We've seen, the process of putting it together. It's time to take a dive into the world of performance. We've actually booted the system up behind me with our setup and run a load of gaming benchmarks to get a really even idea of the FPS you're able to achieve. On your screen now is a summary view, a snapshot view of all the numbers and all the games we tested out to give you a really clear idea of this system's performance. If you'd like to see the full unedited gaming benchmark runs for all titles on your screen now, check out the playlist in the cards section here on our benchmarking YouTube channel called Benched. For now though, let's take a closer look at some of our focus titles, starting things off with GTA 5 at 1440p. Here we got a very impressive 117 FPS on average with 108 and 95 frames per second for the 90 and 99th percentile results tested using Nvidia's FrameView application. Call of Duty's Black Ops Cold War is next, and here at 1440p high settings with DLSS on performance mode, we got 124 FPS on average, with 111 and 98 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. A pretty good showing, if you ask me. Talking of pretty good showings, next up is Apex Legends. And at 1440p high settings, with our FPS uncapped in the Origin game launcher to get maximum performance, you can see behind me it looks pretty damn good. And with 140 FPS on average, I'm not surprised either. The game looked great on this 5600X and 3070 combo. Next up is Valorant, a game that's the easiest probably to run today, but we always love to test it. 1440p high settings gave us in excess of 330 FPS on average, with over 300 FPS for the 90th and over 290 frames per second for the 99th percentile results, which is kind of crazy. Next up, we're going to try a little bit of Cyberpunk 2077, first off with ray tracing on and then with ray tracing off. First up, with ray tracing on, we got 58 frames per second at 1440p with RTX set to medium and the power of DLSS enabled. Hallelujah. And then enabling DLSS but disabling ray tracing jumped us up to 102 FPS on average. That just goes to show you've got nearly a 50% frame rate upside without ray tracing enabled, but even the RTX numbers here were very, very playable, and the game, I think, looked fantastic. That actually brings us nicely onto the final title today, Fortnite, and we tested this at a range of different settings and resolutions. First up is 1080p competitive settings, basically low settings across the board with DLSS set to performance mode. Here we got 202, 184 and 152 for the average 90 and 99th percentile results, so the high frame rate gamers, the esports professionals out there, will be very chuffed, I would imagine. At 1440p high settings with DLSS, it's a similarly positive story, 152, 140 and 123. So you're losing about 50 frames per second, which does seem like quite a lot, but considering we've gone from 1080 to 1440p and from low to high settings, this is actually a pretty good showing in my opinion. And on that note, that pretty much wraps it up, not only for the benchmarks today, but the whole video. If you did enjoy this one, please give it a big old like rating. Make sure to get subscribed if you'd like to see more from us. Thank you very much for watching though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.